Hi everyone, this is a video about Satir categories for communication, and obviously these are categories for language and communication created by Virginia Satir. Now, Virginia Satir specialized in family therapy, and these Satir categories are very useful in understanding how to react to different types of communicators. This is one of my favorite Virginia Satir quotes, and for me, it's the essence of ownership in NLP. I own me, and therefore I can engineer me. I am me, and I am okay. This for me is incredibly powerful because it allows us to realize that we are the ones who direct our experience, our thought process, and our emotions. All we have to do is unpack old habits, bring them into our conscious awareness, and then repack desired habits back into our unconscious. Okay, so let's get on with talking about these categories and where they came from. As I mentioned, Virginia Satir was the queen of family therapy. She was a rule breaker and a rebel, and she went against the grain at the time. She wrote and lectured extensively, and her techniques are still used all around the world by many people to heal dysfunctional families and dysfunctional communication. Now, within the NLP practitioner, we look at the family therapy model, and that is the next video in this section. Obviously, you're aware that meta model was modeled by Bandler and Grindler for NLP in order to help us appreciate the perspective, i.e. what is being assumed by the speaker, and then find ways to resolve any meta model violations. Virginia Satir died in 1980, and her work lives on. Wow, has she left a legacy. So the legacy that we're going to be talking about today are the 5 Satir categories that she identified, and effectively she noticed that people tend to consistently use one of 5 different language behaviors. She labeled these 5 patterns as the blamer, the placater, the computer, the distractor, and the leveler. And these categories describe large chunk styles of communication which give reliable information about how somebody prefers to speak with or converse with other people. Let us look at them individually. Okay, first let's take the blamer. And each of the images on these slides also demonstrates the body language of that particular communication style. Okay, so a blamer tends to point their fingers, they have their palms down, they tend to have quite sort of sticky, rigid, pointy movements. Okay, so the blamer usually looks for somebody else to place responsibility on for things that are going wrong. The blamer projects their feelings and thoughts towards other people, and some people refer to them as skunks because they are always spraying their language all over people. They use very stiff gestures and often point their fingers at the other person. In terms of language, what you are looking for to identify a blamer is their use of universal quantifiers, always, everyone, everywhere, totally, completely, complex equivalences, A equals B, and lost performatives, the judgment statements. Now, unless the blamer becomes conscious of their behavior, then they remain unhealed, and often, unfortunately, the blamer finds themselves alone because they can be perceived as aggressive and threatening in their body language, in their vocal tone, and in the words they use. Let's look at the second one, the placater. Now, the placater in some ways mirrors the blamer because they prefer to have the blame placed elsewhere. They do it slightly differently. They try to shift responsibilities so that they are still perceived to be nice. They may also take the complete opposite path and actually accept all the blame for everything. And they tend to use the meta-model violations of cause and effect, unspecified verbs, and modal operators. Now, unlike the blamer, they never use forceful gestures or threatening words ever. They tend to operate more, what's the word I'd use, in a more sort of covert way. And often they will take the victim role, and they may well sort of assume the position of poor little me and my life's terrible and worse than other people's. And if they are operating in the negative, extreme negative version of themselves, they may use guilt for emotional manipulation. Okay, let's look at the computer. So the computer type uses language that hides emotions. They are emotionally dissociated, and they very much never give themselves away. Think Mr. Spock in Star Trek. It's all a bit smoke and mirrors, coming across as highly logical, always under control, and unemotional. Very much, Mr. or Mrs. Cool. And some people will perceive them as having a cold and unfeeling personality, which can be a little bit unhelpful in romantic relationships. Often spouses will accuse their partners of being aloof or cold or distant or unable to express emotion, and this can cause problems. They tend to live highly associated, and they use words as protection walls or buffers. They will give you many you messages, and they might well deflect responsibility with statements like, one can only conclude that the cause of this was X. So you want to listen to meta-model violations in lost performatives, the judgment statement, nominalizations, the abstract nouns, and lack of referential index. Think bureaucrat, think accountant. Okay, let us look at the next one. Let us look at the distractor. Notice the body language here. The body language of a distractor is moving about the place and nearly always off center. The distractor is really interesting because one moment they will appear as a blamer, the next moment they may present as a placater, and then they may switch into the computer type. They just tend to jump from one to another system, and obviously this causes a lot of distraction, hence the title Distractor. They tend to speak very rapidly in a very confused way. So often they present with a feeling of chaos or creating chaos in the room. In terms of language, they tend to use the meta-model violations of lost performatives, generalizations, and lack of referential index. Okay, the last one, the leveler. Notice the body language. So leveler body language is never palms up. It's always palms together or palms down. And you will notice, if you pay attention to people making speeches, often political speeches, that politicians are trained to use the leveler, this very congruent behavioral style, this very firm and certain behavioral style. So, how does the leveler behave? Well, the leveler is really interesting because they don't have that many distinguishing characteristics except the fact they do not present in any other Satir category. They come across as factual and congruent. And you can pretty much rely that a leveler will speak the truth of their perception. and they will display a congruency between their body language and the words that they use. And I suppose the only potential negative for a leveler is because they tend to speak their truth, they are often upset, or they often upset other people by being quite direct and speaking their truth. Okay, let's talk about identifying the categories. So, as we observe body language, you can usually identify the Satir category because the blamer often uses visual physiology, the posture, the breathing, the gestures. And they tend to point their fingers, and their palms will always be down. On the other hand, the placater tends to match the kinesthetic physiology. Their palms will turn up as if they are pleading, and their breathing is often low, and they may well operate more slowly. The computer operates AD physiology and often has their arms crossed in a more auditory style. And the distractor demonstrates all of these. So you want to have spent a great deal of time with somebody before you identify their preferred Satir category. When under stress, we usually give away our favorite category. So have your sensory acuity attuned when you're gathering information from somebody when they're in a stressed state. Do not jump to a quick conclusion. Listen and watch over time before you decide. And as situations and context change, which they always do, the Satir category we use may actually change. And obviously, we're going to operate a very different category when we're stressed and when we're completely relaxed. Now, because of Virginia Satir's focus on family and how actually families create society and society creates the world, actually what you'll find most frequently is that when somebody is in a stress state, they refer back to the comfort zone Satir style they operated in family, or that their parents operated. So this walks hand in hand with the social evolution of values trained, or the theorem by Dr. Claire Graves, whereby, if the family's in survival mode, then they will operate a certain type of emotion, a certain type of behavior. Again, tribal, next level up, they will operate a certain behavior. So for example, if you grew up in a tribal family, you may well operate the placater as your comfort zone. If you grew up in a values level 3 family, then you may well use the blamer as your comfort zone. If you grew up in a values level 4 family, you may well use the computer as your comfort zone. If you grew up in a survival household, you may well use the distractor communication style. Either way, it's a very interesting observation, and be aware that when we're stressed, we always tend to revert back to where we started in or from birth, effectively. So the real question is, how do we work with Satir categories? And obviously this is about pacing Satir categories. So as a rule, you do not match as with predicate matching. So if you match the Satir category that the other person is using, you are going to break rapport and you are going to enhance the mode the other person is operating in. Satir always recommended that you mismatch with every single communication style except the leveler. So, if you answer a blamer with a blamer, it tends to lead to an argument. If you placate a placater, it leads to a whining contest. If you distract a distractor, you create even more chaos in the room. Okay? So you don't match the communication style unless you are working with a leveler. If you're unsure where to start, and if you're unsure what mode somebody is operating, then always start with the computer mode, because it's AD, it's unspecified, it pretty much neutralizes other modes. And not only that, it gives you time to decide what you're going to do next. With the distractor mode, it's very, very useful for creating humor in presentations. However, please avoid using the distractor mode in one-to-one communications, because it tends to create the impression you have some profound and serious personality problems. Satir suggested that there is often incongruency between what a person's body language communicates and what one actually feels inside. So a blamer may have a stiff and pointing finger and at the same time have a judgmental and confident attitude. However, such a position may actually be covering up feelings of loneliness and lack of success. A placater may say with their posture that they're experiencing helplessness, but inside they may be feeling worthless. On the outside, a computer may seem calm and collected, and inside they may feel uncomfortable and vulnerable. The distractor may sound and act like a scatterbrain, whereas actually they may be feeling very unbalanced and very unloved. So stress always pushes us out of leveling and into one of the other categories. Most people have learned to feel comfortable in a preferred Satir category. However, that may provide a poor means of coping, a poor coping mechanism, because it restricts them rather than expanding their choices. So when we're stressed, we all need an available means of communication, okay? So if we go into our preferred Satir category, we may limit our response to others. What we want to do is expand that to give us a rich variety of response modes under stress. If you are wise, I would recommend that you develop a proficiency in the use of all categories. Something else to mention. Satir categories and using them in presentation and speech making is something that we study in Master Practitioner. And they are very, very powerful for stage anchoring, visual anchoring, and auditory anchoring. Let's have a little look at an example. Let's say you have a no romantic relationship at work policy, and you discover that two people are having a relationship, and then one says to you, your rule is really stupid, you don't trust us to be responsible, all other companies allow it, and if you maintain that rule, I will have to leave. Stop treating us like children. So what you can do is practice responding in each category. So let's think about the blamer. I'm going to give you a couple as an example for you to then imagine what the other labels might use in terms of response. So if you respond to this statement in blamer mode, you might say something like, I am completely fed up with listening to that kind of talk. You know the rules around here. You knew the rules when you engaged your contract. You have known the rules all along. They have always been the same. You never listen. You always want to do things your own way. And it's about time that you realize that I am your employer and you are the employee. To be quite clear with you, if you are unable to align with the rules of this company, which you have already demonstrated that you can't, then perhaps I'm going to choose it's time for you to leave. If you're going to behave like a child, I'm going to treat you like one. Woohoo! Hardcore or what? Now, what about a placater? A placater might say, oh dear, this is such a big mess. Please don't act like that. You know that we don't do ultimatums in this company. Of course I trust you. This has nothing to do with trust. This has to do with the best outcome for the company. And frankly, it's really disappointing when you attack me like that, because it makes me imagine that you've always been unhappy when actually you're showing me you're happy. So maybe you have been lying to me for some time. Honestly, I'm going to find it really hard to trust you, because clearly this relationship has been going on for some time and you have been lying to me. All I'm trying to do is be the best manager to ensure that everyone in this company is safe and protected. And all you're doing is projecting your anger at the fact that you broke the rule on me. And it really hurts me when you're angry. So I'd like you to acknowledge that you're the one who broke the rule, because otherwise you're just really upsetting me when my intention was good. Okay, so now you have two examples. Practice using the computer, the distractor, and the leveler. Be aware that the computer is going to be emotionally dissociated, very logical. The distractor is going to be highly chaotic in emotion, in language, in vocal tonality. And the leveler is going to be very calm, factual, and congruent. So, give it a go. See how you would react to the statement on the top of the slide. Okay, let's have a look at review questions for Satir categories. You can ask yourself, how can you use all 5 categories in expanding your own communication style? What use or value do you see in recognizing, knowing, and using these categories? A little reminder, just to give you context, these categories are so useful in presentations, and all public speakers are trained in Satir categories. They are incredibly useful in business, in leadership, management, sales, negotiation. Okay? They are incredibly useful in romantic partnerships and friendships. And even more exciting, they are incredibly useful to use with your children. And obviously, the ultimate purpose, if you're going to move into coaching, is to use them in coaching in order to shift somebody out of that category. Ask yourself, what did you learn? What do you know? What questions do you have? Looking forward to the next video, which is Satir's family therapy model.